What if something got on the lens of the camera?
It's kind of whitish colored. Like it's a piece of paper or something.
Yeah,
blow everything out.
It looks like that, Bill. That's what it looks like.
Hang on a second. I can't see. I'm already pinned on program, so I can't see anything on the big thing. But if
I'll talk over it. You can see it now. It's underneath the green active speaker. If you're looking at gallery, lower right of the frame.
Over here, where my thumb is.
Other side.
Other side. It's over here.
That's it, right there. That side, right in the corner. Chug chug.
Oh yeah. You know what that is? That's the edge of the. That's the edge of the laptop. There we go. Thank you.
The Edge of Night with Bill Davis.
Edge of the laptop. That's because I was futzing with things yesterday, and it's not below the screen. Yep. Thanks. Replace pin with the program-ish feed. I say that because I'm always confused when we're doing guests because it's not actually the program.
So my buddy bought one of these high-end streamer boxes that looks like a stereo receiver, but it's really an Android in a box with the receiver type of, amplifier, etc., built in it. $800.
Wow.
I'm like, why don't you just get a PC instead?
Well, the web presenter will do it for about that price.
Because this thing looks cool. It's got a touchscreen on the front.
YOLO box?
No, it's for playing Spotify. It's an audio piece of audio gear.
Oh,
that you put in your audio rack.
They make some cool stuff over at Barracks. It's a company in Switzerland, and they're all tiny little devices. So you have a thing called an in-streamer, and then they have X-streamers.
How do you spell that? B-A-R-R?
B-A-R-I-X. I've been using them for years for in-store audio, and they're great. Rock solid.
Yeah, see, that makes sense.
The in-streamer's a little more expensive, but
and
it'll
then
put out an
what do you put on it? Spotify or something?
No, you put Icecast or Shoutcast on it and send it to your pointed at whatever you want it to go to.
Oh, but this just plays back. This isn't streaming out. This is
okay. Well, the Barracks will do that also. You just point it at what the URL you want to receive. You could do it with Spotify. Why not?
Products, audio control over IP.
I have about sitting on the shelf behind me about 30 of those X-Streamer 200s.
We did have a really good group of questions today, so thank you, producers, for making it interesting.
Oh, you're welcome.
As always.
You're welcome. John speaking on behalf of the AIs out there.
I put my question in. No, I have a question of Midjourney today. Well, I guess it's AI, right?
So it's you on AI, not another AI asking questions about AI.
Darn it. Somebody's downvoting.
Have a good show.
Darn you, producers.
Look at that. Our first four at least questions have the same vote totals.
It's Paul. He's downvoting my questions. I know it.
No, I'm not.
Have a great show, everybody. Thank you for being here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. Great to have you here. If you're here via YouTube and want to know more about what we do, head on over to officehours.global. That is our primary web portal. Gives you more information and links about the show. You can also figure out how to get into our Mukana system, which is the system that allows you to ask questions for our panelists to deal with. Today, our second hour topic, we're going to be talking about camera rigging. And so we'll start with the basics, and we'll talk about basic devices like phone rigs and things like that, all the way up to the larger things like jib rigging and stuff like that. Any question about how to put your camera kit together out in the field to get done what you need to get done, that's what we'll be talking about in our second hour today. This is the first hour. However, Mitch, what's our first question from our producers for today?
Thank you, Bill. First in, John Preto, who's right here on our panel. Wave to the people, John. He's in Las Vegas, and he's here asking this question. Update on Midjourney from yesterday's Midjourney's office hours with CEO David Holz.
Go ahead, Mitch. Take it away. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John. Take it away.
Every Wednesday, David Holtz does after he calls it, they call it after hours from noon to whenever he's done answering questions. It's really interesting because he'll go on for about 15 minutes and he'll go through his list of stuff, and then he answers questions for hours afterwards. And he's got more transparency than any other CEO that I've ever seen. And boy, did he go through a laundry list of stuff yesterday that I wanted to share with everybody. Alex mentioned in the pre-show, they do have in-painting now, which allows you to render additional diffusions within one canvas, which is a great feature. So what he announced is version 6 is coming soon, probably next month. So version 6 is loaded with a bunch of new features, higher resolution, 2048 by 2048, smarter natural language processing. So the prompt engineering is going to be upgraded, more control over the variations, improved hand generation, hands and feet will be improved as it was from version 4 to version 5. What they're working on and what he's claiming before the end of the year is both 3D and video before the end of the year, and video on 3D. So those are things that they have working internally, and they've got some really great stuff coming. Alex, you wanted to add some stuff?
I just, all I was going to say is that I started playing with the infill last night, and it's just pretty amazing. I of course I didn't do anything serious because it's not what I do when I test things, but I really I started playing with it, and what you can do with the infill. It took me a minute to figure it out. But essentially, what you end up doing is you render something, you give it a prompt, and then you can select an area. And now, at first, I thought I had to put the whole prompt in because it kind of repastes the prompt in, which is a little confusing. But I realized I didn't have to do that. I could just simply type in what I wanted to add, to add to it. So let me see if I can. I'm having a hard time with the. There we go. I was trying to pull up a preview here, and it was so. I mean, to give you again an absurd example. Let's see here if I can do this comfortably. Let's see, do you see the street here? There we go. Yeah,
there we go.
So I just said, this was like a dark street scene, neon lights, wet street. Like that's all I said, and I got this image out of it. And then I said I selected an area in here, and I said I want an angry octopus. So I ended up with an angry octopus that was very angry. But you can see that it didn't change this outer area. And then I said, give the angry octopus a tribal tattoo, and I got that. So it did change to get the tattoo in there. It did change the octopus a little bit. There were a couple other ones that didn't change it as much. But you can see how you can iteratively add things to it. In my case, a very absurd way. But you can see how you can simply add things to what you're doing, which is unbelievable. Like now you're going to be able to say, I want a scene. You get the scene where you want it. Now put a car over here, put a light switch over here, put a man standing over here, and you can just start, building it. And again, I don't think that the immediate impact is really on actual production, but what it's incredible for is concepts. So I want to show someone and I was talking to someone that works on some of this stuff, and they were talking about the fact that as a supervisor, if you're an art supervisor, art director or a visual effects supervisor, sometimes it's just really hard to explain to people what you want. Like, oh, I want this, and you have a picture in your head, but you can't quite get it down. And if you can't draw really well, then it becomes hard. And they were talking about the fact that it's easier to just go into Midjourney, build something that is close to what you want, and then hand it to the artist and say, it's like this, but change these things. And this is going to make that even easier. It's pretty exciting.
Alec, let's see. Mitchell wanted to get into this. Mitchell?
Yeah, Alex, thanks for that octopus. I'm going to have dreams about that for a while.
I was afraid to bring it up. I was
or-
like, there's some bad dreams there. Yeah, exactly.
how do you save out if, for example, if they're going to do 3D video, how do you save it out of Midjourney to something you can bring into a video edit or whatever?
It'll probably export out as an MP4 is my guess. Like it'll be some kind of, it'll just be some kind of basic packaging. So with the video, that's what people have been doing. The other things that sort video out are sending out MP4s. So it's not going to be super high quality. Again, we're still in this is a fun toy kind of mode, but it won't be a fun toy forever. That's why there's a big strike going on. So that, it's tightening up. The rate at which it is improving is dramatic.
And at some point, a small film with that character in there probably will be accessible to your average 17-year-old. So how many amazing little films will we get out of this new technology? It's amazing.
Yeah, I really think that the danger to Hollywood is not that they're going to replace Hollywood films with AI. The danger is that 17-year-olds are going to build videos that everybody else wants to just watch, that don't have to be as good as Hollywood, that didn't cost anything to make. Like I think that they're thinking about this all wrong, in the sense that they're worried about them taking, the writers have a hard time coming up with good scripts, let alone AI. So I think it's a long way away from, if you look at how many movies a year have actually good scripts, it's probably 10, maybe 15. And so the thing is and that's with an incredible set of teams. And that's what I mean by that is standing over it. You very quickly, as soon as you get to independent film or smaller TV, you realize how fast scripts drop off, as far as quality goes, because there's just not enough people to do it. So I think that ChatGPT is probably not really the thing that's going to, or Midjourney is really going to threaten Hollywood, other than the sense that anybody can create something that's enjoyable. That's the YouTube generation, right? That all of these things are being created that people enjoy, that didn't cost a lot of money to make. That's a super dangerous thing for established media.
Yeah, and it reminds me of when YouTube suddenly, people were all doing all sorts of training videos, and we had tons that were really poorly constructed. And for me, poorly constructed is you've been watching because it promised you how to fix this problem in your software or something. And 3 minutes later, they were still doing promo or something other than giving you the information you were actually looking for. So you got sick and tired of going to that service to find an answer because it was so hard to curate what was good versus the dreck that just came pouring out. And I think there will be a period for this with these things like Midjourney. Well, we'll get a lot of dreck at first. Hopefully then it'll settle in like it did with typesetting and things like that. And people who are just playing with it and doing a bad job of it will start to recede. And the people who are really good will start to use these things for amazing creations.
We've talked about this many times, is that when Photoshop came out, there was a lot of us, me included, that were doing horrible things with it and had no idea what we were doing, and reading books and trying to figure out what kerning meant and how white space meant and how do you frame things but getting paid to do it. Not very much, but getting paid to do it. And then what came out of that as an explosion. But there was a solid 5 years of chaos. Raygun. If anyone remembers Raygun, like that was an unreadable magazine. That was empowered by the fact that we had Photoshop and Illustrator. But I think that is, we're going to go through that moment right now. But and you'll end up with movies about angry octopuses with tribal tattoos.
Which could be fun. I watched that.
Exactly.
2 seconds.
Imagine a video of that, Mitch. Just like him just like coming down after you. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Fun and games. All right, let's go to the next question.
From Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everybody. With the rise of services like Descript and Riverside FM, where are the high-quality local recordings are uploaded to the cloud? Are beefy computers necessary when sending out remote kits?
Paul Wallace is going to start us off. Paul?
You can have both. You can have a beefy computer that doesn't cost very much. If you look at the computer recyclers, like Discount Computers here in Austin, you can get like 10 cents on the dollar for i7 Dells. Pretty good computers. So you may be able to have the best of both worlds.
John Preto.
Chris is doing a lot of Riverside recording, does several a week, and it's not so much the CPU power of these things. What you really need is you need up speed bandwidth. So some of his recordings on the up speed bandwidth transmission after it records is taking an hour, sometimes 2 hours to get that file moved up to the cloud. So that's really your limitation. And we're all waiting for Zoom to have double-sided recording. They announced it I don't know how long ago, and so that's what I'm waiting for.
Alex?
Yeah, currently any computer over $500 made in the last 5 years will do everything you need it to do. We are looking more and more at just sending out laptops. So we've had Mac Minis that we sent out, but we're really looking at now the M1, the Airs, M2 Airs or whatever. Those are just great. You open them up, because I've been using it in my remote kit. As you can see, that is the remote kit that I use is an old, I think 13 inch. It's actually not even a 14 inch, a 13 inch MacBook Pro from 2020. It's still Intel, and it runs fine. Like, it's not working particularly hard to do Zoom and lots of other things. So I wouldn't worry about the price, especially if you're on a Mac side. The M1s are all going to do it fine, but I think that you'll find lots of PCs in the same price range that would do fine as well. I'd be a little concerned about using the really small ones, but otherwise, like the Melees and the B-Links might not be enough. They might, but that would be I'd worry about that. But at $500 and up, last 5 years, you should be fine.
Couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I mean, processor capacity has grown so fast that literally the MacBook Air in my voice booth, if I open up some of my Final Cut projects that were so complicated that they would have crushed my 2 generations ago computer and really brought it to its knees, run just fine on it now. The chips are so much faster, and the I/O and everything about the way the systems run now, it's just much more efficient. So I'm kind of over the era of I have to buy the biggest one. Now, if you do get extra processing thing, it will make you a bit more efficient. You can be running into something like I shot 3840 by 2160 for the last job I did 2 days ago. And processing those big rasters in video takes some time. I mean, a long take of 20 minutes of that kind of a raster is a big file. And so extra processing grunt for those kind of tasks, still very important. But for general business purposes and web work and stuff like that, I think they're all great, exactly as Alex indicated. Let's go to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Fiera, Florida. Western Digital releases firmware updates for SanDisk SSDs. Your thoughts?
Mitch Hill, start us off.
Yeah, they definitely needed to do something, and I'm glad that they did. Just for what it's worth, believe it or not, OWC makes drivers for SSDs, and supposedly they're better than the manufacturer that made them. So it's interesting to consider that the firmware updates are improving the quality of the devices. Wouldn't it be neat to just buy a firmware update from some other person, some third party, and find out that it fixed all the problems with the T6s or T5s?
Alex Lindsay.
Trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Like, I'm not, this is the second time I've been messed up by some firmware issues. I'm done. So that we'll go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah, it's funny. SSDs are kind of problematic that way. Paul Wallace, you had a thought before we finish?
Yeah, if you've got a SanDisk Extreme or a Western Digital Passport, do a serial number lookup, and it'll tell you there's 5 models that were affected by this issue. The issue was unexpected disconnects. So serial number lookup.
There you go. Oh, Alex, you want to get back in it?
We should probably take a couple of years off buying SanDisk products. Like this is, again, as I said, this is the second time I've had a SanDisk issue where we've had continual write problems with these. I will tell you that I'm never buying SanDisk again. This is after the second, once, I blame you, it's your fault. Once is blame me, so twice blame me. So I'm done with SanDisk. It's over, never coming back. This is because I bought a bunch of them thinking that they were going to work, and I'm having startup issues. I don't want to fix the firmware. I just don't want to use the discs again.
So let's go to the next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, who wins this cage match? Sony's new $2,200 ZVE1 or a maxed out iPhone 14 Pro Max running iOS 17?
A lot of hands raised on this one. Paul Wallace is going to start us off. Paul?
This is my answer. The iPhone 14 Pro Max, I've got both. I've got I don't have an E1, I have a ZV1, but the 14 Pro Max is amazing.
Mitch Hill.
The iPhone 14 is certainly a wonderful device, but it's not purpose-made for shooting video. It's made to do a lot of things, including taking phone calls. My ZV E10 does not do that. But I just think that we need to stay in certain areas of expectations. Eventually, the iPhone cannot do everything, but it's going to do one or two things really well.
Alex?
Yeah, it just depends on what you need it for. I take the iPhone 4 out, and I take the iPhone 14 out all the time and shoot a lot of things with it. But there are many, many things. Short depth of field and having a real camera operation, being able to rig all kinds of I/O in and out of it and everything else. Those are things that the phone doesn't do very well. So it's back to it depends.
Yeah, horses for courses is what comes to my mind. You don't take a plow horse out to run a race, and you don't take a race horse out to plow a field. You have to figure out what your stuff does well, and if you know the nature of what you're going to do. Now, I will say, if I didn't know for sure what was happening, I have been way more impressed than I ever thought I was going to be by the quality and utility of using phones, particularly modern high-end cell phones for video production, and I do it all the time now. But like the gig that I just did yesterday, there's no way in heck I would have taken an iPhone out to shoot a bunch of executives in a setup where we lit and had them all looking great. It would have looked great on the iPhone, but if nothing else, the audio I/O would have been wholly inadequate for doing that job. I had a sound man with me, and he could not have attached to the iPhone correctly in the same way we would have been doing double system. That would have created a big problem where with the camera I was using, he was able to give me a feed, plug it into the camera, and now all of a sudden the client has great sound embedded in the files. It's that horses for courses idea. What are you trying to do is what I think determines the rig you take out into the field. Let's go to the next question.
From Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida. When sending out mic kits to interviewees, has anyone experimented with including a long Ethernet cable and a USB dongle for the folks that are only using Wi-Fi? That router's got to be somewhere.
Alex, what's your length of cable trust factor in this?
Yeah, no, we've definitely, I mean, the longest cable we've sent out is about 300 feet. We haven't needed to do it very often. Typically, a person at home or at an office is usually less than 100 feet away. So 100-foot Ethernets are pretty common for us to send out, and oftentimes we do send them out with converters on them. So a USB-C, we usually talk to them about what they have and try to figure out what we should send out as an interface to the computer. And it's a pretty common thing for us to do, is to send out Ethernet. A lot of times we're talking to them, and to the point of this question, people will say, hey, do you have, do you have a router? And they're like, oh yeah, but the router's really far away. Is it okay to run and we have to be very nice about it. It's all a question. But is it okay if we run a cable through your house just during the show? You can take it down afterwards. And they're like, oh, I think it might be okay. Then we call, we do an Amazon order and send them a 100-foot Ethernet cable to it. If they say it's 50 feet away, we send 100. If we say it's 25 feet away, we say 50. We kind of double what people's assumptions are because it has to wrap around. They're not used to doing running cable. So those are the things that I would, we definitely take those things into account. The other thing you have to be careful of, which we've gotten bitten as recently as last week, is people will hook up the Ethernet, but then they will forget to, on a Mac, it prioritizes one or the other, and it may be prioritizing Wi-Fi. So even if you hook the Ethernet to the computer, you have to make sure that they turn their Wi-Fi off, and then you test it again to make sure it's going through the Ethernet. And that's another thing you have to do in addition to the Ethernet.
At this point, thank you for all of your questions so far. We have a good, robust list, but we can always use more, so don't forget, if you have not done it yet, we use a system called Mukana for handling the questions. And if you're part of Office Hours and are enjoying this, want to contribute to the show by adding questions in, go to the website, follow all the links there, and figure out how you can do that. it's really fun to be a question provider for the show as well. It's kind of, I think everybody enjoys when their questions, they get answers to their questions specifically for their problems. And that's what this show is all about. And the voting on questions is equally important because the most voted questions are the ones we get to the quickest and spend the most times with. So get in the system and start voting on questions. Next question.
Here's Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois, asking, how would an MV7 hold up in a live environment, recording in a bookstore, so not a lot of ambient noise?
Alex, start us off.
It'll work fine. We've used it a lot for that kind of thing. So MV7s will be fine in a live environment, and they have a lot of off-axis rejection. An SMB7 or SMB7 will work better. It's got a little less sensitive to plosives. So if you're going to have someone record something, think about a pop mic for the MV7. The foam at the end of it is just it's a lot thinner than the SMB7 or SM7B. I can't keep all the letters together here. The SM7B, though, has a thicker foam at the end, and it's a lot less sensitive to popping. We do find that the pop filter helps with the MV7 to make that actually work. So that's the only thing to consider. But otherwise, it works fine as a live. It's got a USB, so if you want to put it into a USB mixer, you can. But it also has XLR, so you can put it through a standard mixer.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, I'm talking on an MV7 right now. If I pull this, I'll do this gingerly. You can see the size of the microphone. I think it'd do great in a bookstore, but you'd need to get a good stand for it. I'm using a boom. You'd want probably a desktop stand, or it depends on the bookstore. I'm thinking Book People in Austin, it'd work great.
Mitch Hill.
Yeah, I'm with Paul on that. You need a shock mount of some kind. A desk mount one, especially if you're signing books right there, there's going to be a lot of noise being generated. But if you can get it on a boom or a shock mount, I think it will solve that problem. By the way, Shure mics, solid. Dynamic mics, even more solid. A chance to use that particular mic in a environmental, like a bookstore, would be fun.
So the only thing I'm going to add to this is that you say just a live environment. That can be a number of different things. Like I wouldn't use an MV7 for a band singer, obviously, because they need some sort of hold-on stick mic. And one of the criteria of those kind of mics is very much rejection of handling noise. A desktop mic or something for a podcast is a wholly different thing if it's on a boom arm and it's sitting fixed in one position, as we use them here on the show. I mean, you'll see everybody with a mic in front of us. That mic is going to stay in one position, as are we. If you get into a circumstance where you're in a bookstore and you want to mic the person maybe with something like that we use here on the show, but also want something in the audience to pass around for questions, there you're moving into this other thing where you want a handheld system that can be passed around without a lot of handling noise. And these mics tend to have more handling noise than a stick mic for a pass-around circumstance.
I will say I'm surprised at how many people are using the MV7s and just holding on to them. I just saw one with Mark Cuban where the podcaster or whatever or the YouTuber had they were doing it with him, and they were holding on to these things. And I've never seen Mark Cuban so uncomfortable. Like that was the most uncomfortable interview I've ever seen in my entire life. I couldn't even watch it. I watched part of it. He was sitting on the floor in a garage. Like it was the weirdest. Like if you're gonna ask Mark Cuban to be on your show,
give him a chair at least.
little prep. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Like it's just it felt like if you search for Mark Cuban, I think sitting on the floor on YouTube, you'd probably see it. But if you're going to ask someone important, it would be good for to plan well to have a good show. So anyway, hopefully you'll do better in the library than sitting on the floor in a parking garage.
Next question.
John Aguapitos from Sydney, Australia, asking, hi, everybody. I have installed a Meraki Wi-Fi system in an office with 5 access points. When on a Zoom call and you move around the office, is it normal for Zoom to stop working?
Alex, give us some help with
It shouldn't.
Wi-Fi pass.
Especially with a Meraki system, the handoff between the APs should be exceptionally good. I think you have probably some kind of configuration issue where the Merakis may not think that they're in the AP points, might not think that they're in the same, subnet, or there's some kind of, or there's a break between them, or they're conflicting. I mean, but that's a very unusual thing to happen with a Meraki system.
Paul.
Yeah, it should work fine. And John, we enjoyed helping you through some issues yesterday and after hours. Look forward to seeing you again.
All right, next question.
From Eric Herson, Hartford, Connecticut. Does Magewell or AWS Link support NDI input? If they did, would you consider using this rather than the SDI input?
Alex, what say you?
They don't, and I wouldn't.
There you go.
I'm not gonna, I personally, and I know there's a lot of people here that use NDI for production. I don't use NDI for production. I use it for monitors. So I send stuff out to things, but I don't have NDI manage anything that actually is part of my core pipeline.
Is it? What is it? In unreliability? Is that right word? Is that what?
It just I don't trust it. Like I just don't trust it. I think that I don't trust it as a core pipeline. And we're now doing a lot of testing with 2110. And so 2110 is like, again, it's taken a lot longer for it to come out. It's taken a lot longer for it to get there, but it's much harder to process. Like it's not easy. Like I can't just plug a bunch of Ethernet cables in and have it all work. But every time, I've seen enough on this panel, just watching the panel and people's screens going green and things popping around here and there that I'm like, that didn't help me, think that this was going to be better. So there's even just outside of my own experience, there's been enough issues that I've seen with software-based stuff that I'm still pretty hardware-based and baseband.
Yeah, sometimes you get that little prickling feeling in the back of your neck, like this technology is fine, and when it works fine, but I've just come to not fully trust it.
I think there's a lot of people that do a lot of good things with it, and so I know that I'm limited in that area. But I do really, I guess the other problem is like I do really complicated things. Most of my shows have satellite trucks, and I have to run really long runs, and they're really complex, and there's a lot of planning, and if anything goes wrong, there'll be a lot of meetings, and so I think that probably the kind of shows that I do, I don't want to explain to someone why my network video didn't work. Like that's the biggest thing is just kind of a CYA of I just don't want to explain it.
Is NDI one of the causes? Remember back in the early days of the show, we used to get that green and purple.
It was every time it was NDI.
That was okay.
And I think it's really convenient. And again, I use it a lot for like, hey, let's send something really quick, or if I'm doing something internal or I'm having some fun. I think NDI is great and it works most of the time. It's just, that's the problem. It works most of the time, and it's just very rare for SDI to surprise me. Like it's not, and so that's the, it takes more infrastructure into planning. And again, we're looking pretty heavily at, at 2110 now that Blackmagic is supporting it, where, it's not all coming out yet, but obviously there's a lot of opportunity there.
So some thoughts anyway. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida has a question. Can you suggest some reliable 1080p live stream capture cards for around $100? Not Blackmagic, the Blackmagic SDK issues. Thanks.
John Preto.
The only thing that I know that I trust at that price is the Elgato Cam Link. You can get the 4K Cam Link for under $100. It's like $90.
Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, you're not going to find something that is got better SDKs than Blackmagic for $100. Like that's the problem. Like the Cam Link I don't believe has any SDK that I know of. So, when you're down to a low price, then you're not using an SDK. And so I don't know if you're trying to use an SDK, I just don't know what card you're going to find that you could interact with other than Blackmagic at that price point.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and right here on our panel, have you seen Amazon Inspire? It's a TikTok-like shopping feed that supports both photos and videos, and there's a long link to it there.
Paul Wallace, start us off.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find. It's not really an app that you can just install. You have to go get a URL. I got the URL, and then it looks like TikTok. It's a very TikTok-like thing. Here's somebody showing you how to mark on a clear plastic surface, and it's TikTok-like, very much so. And this is the same thing we talked about with the 500 videos for $12,500 that has all the blogging community incensed right now that they would offer such a low rate.
Alex?
Yeah, the thing what's interesting is this is always the problem with paying people. Like TikTok didn't pay anybody to make any videos, and they're all making all these videos. And so I think Amazon thought that, well, we can pay a little and that'll be better than TikTok. But as soon as you add money, people start to like equate it to hourly. Like if you have something, that's out there, you can say, hey, you can do whatever you want, and then people jump on it because they're not thinking about how much they're getting paid per hour. As soon as you start giving them a number, they're like, hey, I'm only making $5 an hour. This isn't worth it. It's a very interesting like human quality to do that. And so that's the complicated thing that Amazon has got itself into. I think Amazon's desperately trying to figure out how the Chinese are doing so much sales over live streaming, and they just can't quite figure it out, like how it's actually working. So anyway,
Alex? Oh, I'm sorry, that was Alex. Paul wanted to come back in on this.
Yeah, they're going to have to figure out an easier way for folks to get the app on their phones.
Oh, they're just getting
without
started.
having to.
I mean, they're just getting there. It's hard because they're trying to figure it out. I mean, we're seeing the first little bits of it, but a lot of people do stuff that's hard while they're trying to figure out like just the interface and how it works and whether it makes sense. So I think you should look at what they're doing right now as a beta. They're not trying to roll it out yet. When they feel like it's working in beta, they'll probably push it out wider.
And e-commerce and what it's going to look like in this era of people coming, there's so many eyeballs go to TikTok to watch those little videos. And you're right, there's so much creative energy that goes into it just because people say, I want to put up a cool thing and get a lot of views and get a lot of notoriety amongst my friends for having a really cool TikTok video. Translating that into the business space can be a real big challenge. We'll see how it goes. Next question.
This is Jeff Cohen from Miami Beach, Florida, asking, what voodoo did Pixel Professor Nick Justition use on Tuesday's show to sound so good with his Yeti mic? Seemed a bit far from him, fairly off axis, looked like lots of flat, hard surfaces in the actual room, and yet sounded great for an interview.
Alex, did you...
I have no idea what Nick was using, but I think that it does. There's just a lot of physics in a room, and while they may have a lot of hard surfaces, if the hard surfaces are at the right angle, you won't necessarily hear a lot of reflection. The other side of that is also that that he could be using some of the. Nick has a lot of NVIDIA cards, so he could be using some of the NVIDIA voice improvements that are there. We'll have to ask Nick next time he's on, but I'm not certain. But I think those are two possible outcomes, maybe both together.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I thought it sounded pretty good, but he had it off to the side. And whenever he turned to look at something or gestured to something, it did go off axis and sound a little bit off mic. But for the most part, I thought it was doing a great job. And I can see why you asked a question, Jeff, because I don't usually expect to see that kind of quality from a Yeti just as it is.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said this far. We talk about read the room, but listening to the room, I've walked into circumstances I thought, oh, this is going to be horrible. And I set everything up and you put the headphones on and you listen and go, well, that sounds remarkably good. You just happen to get right at a set of nulls and it's all the problems defeated themselves. Occasionally,
I walk in and I say, this is going to be horrible. And then it is.
Yeah.
That's what happens 90% of the time.
All of us know. You walk in and do the clap test and you get a half-second slap back from a wall and then two other reflections and you're going, okay, I don't know what I can do other than bring in a sound booth and put it in the middle of the room to clear this up. So audio's hard. It's just hard. There you go. Next question.
David Brady from New York, asking, probably should have asked this on the audio day. Space is limited at the office. Are these mobile isolation booths worth consideration for run-and-gun voiceover work?
Alex,
yeah, they're not isolation booths, but they are really good at handling what we just talked about. So what these little booths will do oftentimes is they'll drop the exterior sound by a little. I mean, there's material there, so it's going to, depending on how thick the material is, it might drop it by 10, 20 dB, which might be enough for you to be able to filter it or do whatever you're going to do later. But what's really useful for them is that they suck up a lot of reflection. So if you need to go somewhere and have someone record something and not have it be echoey like it was in their office or in a big hall or whatever, these booths tend to work really well. But you have to just remember that you're not making a significant difference in the amount of ambient noise that's arriving, you're really cutting down on reflections.
Mitch?
I think it's a great idea to use it. There's a lot of them out there, and there's some very expensive ones too. But here's your pitch, Dave. If you're going to sell it to your corporate overlords, tell them it's a movable asset. In other words, when you buy it, you can depreciate it as a separate device, and you can move it to your next office when they move you out of there.
I will say, from the many voiceover booths, voiceover websites I'm on, probably the most misunderstood aspect of recording audio is what we're talking about now. It's the difference between isolation, and that's the word that David used in this, looking for a mobile isolation booth. They don't do what real isolation is, and they can't. That's just physics. Anything, my goal used to be, listen, if I had a stink bomb and I put it off somewhere in the room, would you still smell it standing in the microphone? Isolation is completely enclosing where you're doing your performance such that there is no exchange of audio reflections or anything else. The mic truly is isolated. Those are the expensive solutions that we spend a lot of money to put a room within a room to isolate. Managing reflections and treating the room for the kind of things that Alex talked about, absolutely. Some of these things can work well. Sometimes they don't work as well as you think, though. So it's actually a pretty complicated thing to set up a space to really be excellent for recording audio. And that's why we talk about it so much. So continue to come in on Wednesday for our audio experts. Continue to bring your questions here. Your specific circumstance is the treating that, figuring out what's going on and why you don't like what you're hearing, and taking the right steps and bringing in the right products to fix those problems are the only sure way that I know of to get a really great sound anywhere, everywhere. Let's go to the next question.
Joachim Berends from Delft, Netherlands, asking, have you seen the tour through the new Formula One Technology Center in Biggin Hill, UK, where everything is remotely controlled on all F1 races across the world?
Well, he has a video there. That would be fun. I didn't have time to watch it this morning, but Alex, did you get a chance to see what he's talking about?
I did.
Wow.
Fortunately, he asked it early before the show, and that's the best time to submit videos for us to look at. So I was able to sit there and watch through it. And it was mostly English. It's pretty impressive. So basically there's still things that they're doing on site. They're still shading the cameras. They're still, they have probably a backup switching system that's there. They have, there's still things that have to be done. So still a big crew on site managing that. But a lot of the playback and the graphics and many of the edits and many of the other things that are being put together are being done, remotely at this F1 master control. And it's in Biggin Hill, UK, and it's super impressive. I would highly recommend watching the video. We've had some folks from F1 come on and talk to us in after hours a couple times, and they have taken it to an entirely different level. And I think that one of the things that makes F1, I was really trying to think about why F1 does this so much better. And they get people who are not even into car racing. And, because the content is so good. And it's partially because they own the entire pipeline, so even with the NFL works very hard on making things work. And it's probably the next one behind F1 as far as being able to build compelling content around a sport. But the NFL, what it does is it's constantly doing R&D, but the broadcasts are still run by different companies. It's run by NBC or ABC or Amazon or CBS. And that interaction there is still an inefficient linkage. And so the NFL does really well, but there's really something that happens with the fact that you are the sport and you're doing all the video and you're trying to tie it all together. And there's not a bunch of different companies to work with. You're not trying to figure out an interlink to those companies. You're just, this is the way we do it. And I think you're seeing that with F1. It's a really impressive video. I would highly recommend looking at it.
There you go. Sounds excellent. Don't forget, your questions drive the show. Make sure your votes count. So not only add your questions to the queue, but vote on those questions. Vote them up or down, and make sure that we know what you're most interested in hearing us address. Next question.
From Ronnie Hafsøy from Tromsø, Norway, labels for cables, racks, patch panels, equipment, text, graphics, logos, QR codes, barcodes, and various colors. Is there a single solution for all these, and what is your favorite out there? And what about glue types, material, ease of use, and cost?
Simple, direct question, Ronnie. I like that. We could talk about this for the next half hour, but Alex is going to start us off.
We probably could do a whole hour on labeling. So labeling and label process. So The thing that I have sitting on my desk, so it's easy for me to grab because I use it all the time, is this P-Touch Cube Plus. This can be plugged into your computer, or I just use it with my phone. So I'm like, oh, I need a label, and I pop open there's an app for it, and I just pop open the app. I type in what I want, I hit print, and I come out with, a little label like that. Well, let's see, a little label like that. So, so this is, and the reason I do that because a lot of us have these. The reason I put my name on it, remember who's got which one. This one does up to 1-inch tape. There's a lot of different kind of tapes it can work with. The plus is important. The cube, the first cube, is much more limited. All kinds of different thicknesses, colors, etc. Once I go past this, I'm usually using a Brady labeler, which is about 5 times as expensive as this is, but it'll print on metal. I mean, it's got like incredible label options. The high-end Brady's are kind of the thing to do those kind of things. Past that, when you're doing cables, remember that you're usually going to have to use a clear cable wrap. And that usually it's a shrink wrap. I don't have it at arm's reach. But basically you put that over, and typically you have to do it before you finish the cable. So if you're buying finished cables, it doesn't work as well. But when we build them with that, you put you put your label on, you put that shrink wrap on it, and then you hit it with a heat gun gently, and that'll shrink right onto your cable and keep and protect it. I haven't found one that you can just wrap onto your cable and expect it to stay there forever. So that's the thing you want to kind of think about when you do those. I find that the stickiness just isn't there. But you do have to think about that when you're building the cables, because again, once you put the head on, the shrink wrap would have to be so big to get over the head that it doesn't work as well. I have seen some that are slitted, but we have problems with them over time.
Mitch.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. Brother, P-Touch is the way to go. And they have so many different types of label cartridges that you can use with these devices. I think they have a self-laminating cable thing where you wrap it around, and the last layer is a clear plastic that does sort of what you're talking about, but without the shrink wrap capability. But I have them in black. I have them in white. I have them up to 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. And I use it for everything. And their software is pretty much bulletproof.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, Alex, you showed that the other day on one of the other shows, and I looked it up on Amazon. It's out of stock, so you're going to have to look around for it, I think. Maybe it's because of you, Alex.
Who knows? Who knows?
I use P-Touch as well. The only thing I do differently than Alex is that I like one with a keyboard on it, because I can hand this to somebody and say, go replace, go take that old label off and put this one on, and they don't have to have any software on their phone or anything else. But P-Touch has worked for me just as well for a long, long time. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, for connecting a DAW with virtual instruments to a Dante network, would DVS or a hardware Dante device like the RME Digital Dante be better?
The Digiface Dante. Alex?
Yeah, you need to have at least one device with a chip on it in your Dante network for it to work properly. I mean, we've tried to use just DVS, and you really need to have something there that's gonna provide a proper management of the clock.
Mitch Hill.
A quick way to do it is one of those Avio modules that they have that you can plug into your device, and they also have them for USB, so it can talk with the UVC to the computer. So I think your virtual instruments would go out okay. And it's a cheap way to get into it without buying a bunch of expensive. I know Army, I have them, I love them, but they're expensive.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, asking, how do you show how your space flows with the Fly-Through app for iOS?
Paul, I've never heard of this. So is there some sort of iOS fly-through device, and can you talk to us about it a little bit?
Yeah, I saw this on Leo's show, and I think it was on Windows Weekly or something. And basically, you just walk around your house with your phone. You just wander around, pointing it wherever, and AI stitches everything together and gives you a tour, of smooth flowing tour without any jitter or anything.
That's pretty cool. Do you have? Oh, I see it. Luma Labs AI fly-throughs.
Pretty cool.
Is it an upload all your material to them, and then they do the processing in the back end, and then send you a video? Leo
on the show, he said it'd take 45 minutes. So he said, we'll take a 45-minute commercial break and come back. Of course, he was kidding.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to process.
Okay, so the only thing I would be, if you have sensitive content, obviously I'm not sure you want sending that up to a third party to do the stitching and walkthrough, but for your standard real estate thing or, house walkthrough, or just to document your place, the first thing that came into my mind is it'd be really smart to do this in everybody's house for an insurance claim. If you have a flood or a fire or something like that, and you want to make sure that you can say, I owned these devices and they were worth this much, to be able to show people that that was part of your household goods inventory would be really useful. Alex, do you have some thoughts about this?
Yeah, we talked about this a couple days ago. This is definitely a space to watch for real estate, which is the NERF. So this is neural radiance fields, and that's what they're using here. And so the downside of NERF is you don't really have editable data. Like there's nothing to do with that NERF other than to look at it. The upside is for real estate, that's perfect. The key is that the render time or the compute time doesn't really matter. What you're talking about, you're not trying to use it right after you did it. You're going through a bunch of tours. You're going to punch it out later. The main thing that's really powerful is that it lowers labor time. So it means that a person can sit there and go through lots and lots of houses in one day, or lots of apartments, and then just push them into a server to upload. And so I think that is a pretty powerful thing. I think for what they're showing with real estate, what they're really talking about here is the ability, you're going to put them on the cloud anyway. People are going to look at these because you're trying to rent the house out. So putting it in the cloud to be calculated is not that big of a deal. So I think this is where when I really saw a lot about NERFs, I immediately thought, well, real estate's going to be different forever. So it still to do what they're showing here probably took an hour to shoot it, like not just to do it. I mean, you can wave it around, but you still have to, the camera still has to see everything at least once to understand, to figure it out. So you still have to this was probably painstakingly shot to create what you see here. So it's not, it looks really impressive, but there's still time. It's not like you just wandered through and waved your camera around. Someone who knew what they were doing were covering it. And anybody who's done photogrammetry, that's kind of the same thing. We have to cover it at least once.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fascinating technology to keep our eyes on. I'm certainly going to pay attention to this from now on. Next question.
From David Brady in New York, New York. Salvaged an AJA FS1 from an old location. What are some real-life practical uses of this handy device?
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, the FS1 is great. We've had a bunch of them. We now have mostly FS4s, FS2s, and FS-HDRs, but the FS1 was a single channel input. You converting frame rates, so you can typically convert frame rates out of there. You can also embed, de-embed, and remap. I believe with the FS1 you can embed, de-embed, and remap audio channels, which is good. I do believe there's limited delay that's also available. I can't remember where they added there used to be a watermark system, but most of the stuff I've owned is an FS2 or above. But the FS2 had a watermark. It also had the ability to scale up and down. So you'd be able to scale an image. A lot of times we would scale part of an interface out. So you can scale it up, you can scale it down. It usually is pretty good at it. So those are some of the things that I believe an FS1 will do. Again, we bought one FS1, and then after that we all had FS2s and 4s and HDRs, and we have a bunch of them, the HDRs in the system. So this is a general understanding of how the FSs work, but they're really powerful machines. Be careful. No. The one thing I will say is if you're scaling, this is something to test. On an FS2, at least the original FS2s, and so possibly with the FS1, the way it processed color is that it would subsample that when it scaled it. And so what you would see is if you go from 1080p or 1080i to 720p or 1080p to 720p, you'll notice stair-stepping on pure colors like red. So do a test of that if you're ever going to do that. But that's the one thing that was a shortcoming of the FS2. I don't know if it was a shortcoming of the FS1.
Next question.
Eric Hers from Hartford, Connecticut asking, getting hardware vendors to support modern codecs like AV1 is frustrating. Let's brainstorm about how to receive 2110 video via IP on a Mac Mini. Would you feel comfortable with such an encoding compression streaming solution in production?
Alex, what say you?
Yeah, I'm just waiting to get my Sonnet box. I'm going to buy a Sonnet box specifically for this need because the Blackmagic now has IP, so I can get in and out of up to 2 channels to do that. And I'm going to be testing that hopefully next week, if not the week after. So I'm going to have a Sonnet box that we're going to be testing that with. And so stay tuned.
John Preto, you had a thought?
Alex said exactly what I was thinking.
Oh, there we go. All right. Great minds think alike. So we're moving on to our next question.
John Agapitos from Sydney, Australia, asking, thanks for the help on After Hours Crew. I've got my Synology Snap replication working. It's currently replicating 35 terabytes of data. However, the destination is not showing any files. Do I have to be patient and wait 23 hours for the first backup?
Alex.
Yeah, I would wait for it to be done with whatever it's doing before I worried about whether it did it or not. So there may be a little bit of a setup time there, but I wouldn't worry too much about it, because sometimes it depends on the operating system and everything else of whether it's going to show anything before it's done.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, I'd recommend you come back in after hours. And the gentleman that I mentioned to you yesterday, I sent him an alert that you might be coming back, and he's a mastermind when it comes to to that product.
All right, let's move to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's here. What does the panel think of the Yamaha DM3? From my observation, the one knob interface seems to be a lot less efficient for live mixing.
Alex?
It's actually pretty common. I mean, the way Yamaha has worked for a long time is you select a channel and then start to work with it, and you're oftentimes working with a single knob. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, because usually what you get access to that you need for live, you're trying to do in pre-production. So when you're doing rehearsals and everything else, the things you would do with that knob are typically done then. So during the live show, you're typically not using that knob, and you might be tweaking things, but it's usually pretty minor, and it's usually something very specific. The mixer, looking at it, I haven't used it yet. It's starting to grow on me a little bit. I just don't like all the cables next to. You could get a stage box for it, but all the cables running into my desk is not something I'm usually super excited about. But I think that at the price point and for the target market they're doing, it looks like a pretty useful little mixer.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. It's interesting. I used to have only traditional audio control sliders, lots of sliders, mix bus, output bus, all the rest of that stuff. When I switched into doing the desktop work here, I moved to that Universal Audio Apollo Solo, which is a single big knob in the middle of things. And I thought at first, that means it can only do a few things. It'll be pretty simple to operate. Boy, was I wrong. And it has to do with the fact that there's tons of configuration stuff done in the software behind the scenes. And exactly what Alex is saying, you preset so many things that need deep control, but you do those ahead of time. And when you come down to actually being able to perform with it, if you've got it set right, a one button tap and an adjustment of a level, and then you have to do something else. So you go to the second button and you adjust that with the same knob, and it seems to work really well and be very flexible, because most of the stuff is behind the scenes.
And I think that the thing that I've the hard part for me is that most of my production is X32 rack, or then we start at Q01s. So this is kind of fits in between that. So it's a little bit of a blind spot for me, because I love having the mixer all built into the rack, so that it's all the wiring is all in one place, and I can unpack it and unpack it. And so that, and having a controller that's just connected, the X Touch, controller being just connected via an Ethernet is super convenient. And so that's why I kind of lean towards that. So I think of, in that sub $2,500 so far, I really think about the X32 as the solution. And but again, Yamaha's a great package, and we use tons of QO1s, QO5s, CL5s. That a lot of those are things that we've used pretty heavily in the past.
Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What are the costs and benefits you gain from subscribing to 11 Labs? Clone your own voice, or a voice you have a permission and rights to? Only you have access to the voices you create.
Start us off, John Preto.
I'm a paying member of 11 Labs. We use it all the time. We use it for little videos that we do, and we cloned Courtney's voice with his permission, of course. We just took one of his videos off of YouTube and ran it through 11 Labs, and now we have Courtney in a box. And it works fantastic. We've done tons of audiobooks with different voices that we have the rights to. So it works great.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, I cloned my voice on Apple's new personal voice, and compared to 11 Labs, it's like kindergarten compared to graduate school and college. I mean, 11 Labs, I could clone my voice and play it out in Indian English, Irish English, Australian English. That's amazing. I look forward to learning more from John Fredo, who's way further down the line with this.
Mitch Hill.
I don't think these devices or software are there yet. I think that it's better to use a real-life person. Full discourse, I'm a voiceover person on the side. I do it. It's my side hustle. And for $50, I'll do anything you want, John.
Alex.
I think that the real opportunity here is it really offers an explosion in for a variety of things, but really an explosion in how we move information around. When you look at having readers for every magazine, every book, it's just not sustainable. There's not enough money there to do it. So, doing a typical voiceover is somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, to do for a whole book, and it's nothing for this to do what it's doing, or relatively nothing for it to do it. And I think that it does make sense to have human voices do things that have a wider reach. But I think the AI voices, there's just so many books. There's a book that one of my favorite books, historical books, is called Africa, Biography of a Continent. And if you haven't read it, it's amazing. But it's 700 pages. And I really want to reread it, but I don't want to reread it. I don't think I can. I just can't sit down and read 700 pages again. And it's just the most amazing book by John Reeder. And I check all the time, like, I would love to recommend that. I would love to listen to it. And I would love to have it in some format that I could hack so that I could just put it into 11 Labs and have it just do it. Because I just, really find myself wanting to have some of these older books, more obscure books, converted to audio. And I think that that's going to be for the consumer, that's going to be a huge opportunity for us to listen to things that just haven't been available.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, as I think I got this right. As I recall, I signed up, and it's $5 a month for the very lowest tier, but they give you $4 off for the first month.
Interesting. As you can imagine, in the narration space and audiobooks and things like that, this is highly debated right now, particularly since Hollywood's on strike in part because of this exact topic, the use of AI to replace performance. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how it works out. I can see tons and tons. This is just personal from me as a longtime narrator, longtime voice talent who is kind of confronting this happening there. There's going to be a host of kinds of content that this will work brilliantly for and create no problem. If you really try to get into what the upper end voice talents do, particularly the actors who are in audiobook narration and things like that, at some point, somebody has to decide, or you can, I guess, program an AI to try to decide how much anger does this line need to land right. A human voice talent is going to make that decision and is going to play that particular line of dialogue or that particular piece in the context of everything. If you take that brain out of it and you have an AI doing it, then the question is, does somebody have to algorithmically determine in the 10 lines of increasing anger for this scene, how do you tell the AI to modulate anger correctly over the arc of that to make it satisfying? Does it go from 1 as a measure of anger to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or does it go 1, 4, but then it comes back down to 2 because he's having second thoughts about being angry, and then escalate to 10 as he blows up? This nuanced stuff that people who are really good actors intuitively understand how to bring a character to life. I'm not saying it can't be done, but somebody has to program in the algorithms.
The thing is that the fiction. All I'll say here, real quickly, I know we're at the end of the hour, is that if you walked into a bookstore, I know there are not very many, so you have to kind of look for them now. But if you walked into Borders bookstore and you look at the fiction section is less than 10% of the bookstore. So all we're talking about when we're talking about emotion is a tiny, and it really is like 1% of the market. And so the thing is that there is 99% of the market is informational stuff that we just need to turn into audio like that. So I think that we worry about it. And I think that you're totally right that actors are important for all the stuff, but it's just a tiny little part of the market. And what we're missing is all that content and all that knowledge is locked up in an old storage medium, which is text. And we need to unlock that and make sure that we all have it available to us, in my opinion.
Fair enough. These things are going to be debated for a while. We are in the transition period where this wasn't possible before it, but now it is. We're right on the cusp of being able to switch into our second hour. Don't forget, tomorrow, Friday, we're going to be doing custom computing with Puget Systems. So if you're interested in those kind of high-end systems, come back for that definitely tomorrow. It'll be really fun. So now we are heading into our second hour, which means that we do a little transition here, and I'm going to say stand by. Welcome back to an exciting second hour here on Office Hours. We're going to be talking today about all sorts of connections and rigging for your camera. If you're like most of us, you bought your camera originally, got really excited about it, but then suddenly needed all sorts of extra capabilities on top of what the camera just comes with. And so particularly in the era where we moved from dedicated camera bodies to things like DSLRs and other non-traditional video cameras, most of us use cages and rigs and extensions. What we're really looking to do is get a variety of different kinds of capabilities to add capacity to our cameras. And that's where you come into camera accessories, camera rigging, adding things from the outside. As I normally do on these basic Tuesdays, Thursday things, I've got just a couple of really slides here to just kind of frame what we're going to be talking about and to get the conversation going. We are looking for your questions about how camera rigging affects you, what you want to do. Let's dive into just a couple of them really quickly. The first slide I wanted to show was just this. It has to do with the kinds of different rigs. We have small handheld things. We have DSLRs. We're moving up to medium rigs. And then there's the kind of thing that Alex's brother was talking about, the amazing rig he showed us with the gigantic cameras that have so many aspects of it. There are four primary areas I'd like you to think a little bit about. That is camera support. How are you going to physically hold the camera? What are you going to put a cage around it, or are you going to put it on top of a tripod or something like that? Power. How are you going to get power to it? Audio and video. Cages, very quickly, all sorts from simple cages that go around a camera to allow you to attach a couple of things. The next kind of thing is tripods, small and large. All sorts of gimbal rigs. They're more and more popular, but boy, do they make rigging more complex, because if you're trying to do an audio tap out of a camera on a gimbal, you need a different set of tools. And of course, things like jibs and other large things where you can see on the lower photo here, there's just tons and tons of rigging required to get all of the outboard stuff in place. Power, we'll talk about maybe rigging batteries and the power taps from them. Are you going to go to AC power? And if so, how are you going to rig that with what you're doing? The audio side of things, some sort of a way to get audio in and out. And again, with things like gimbals and remote heads of jibs, this becomes very important. And the video part of it. How are you going to monitor what you're seeing? Is it going to be something on the camera? Are you going to be monitoring out because you're working with a crew and your crew needs to be able to see? Maybe you have clients on set. All of this is kind of the overview of the subject we're going to be talking about. How do you rig your camera, and what are you looking to get accomplished in the field to make your shoot a success, to have the right stuff with you, to have all the right connectors and cables and adapters and bolt-ons so that everything is in place, it's stable, and you can get your work done. Okay, that's kind of the generic overview. Now I'm going to turn to Alex and say, Alex, what are you thinking? What's your thinking about this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you start thinking about cameras and you go, well, I'm going to have, a couple things that I might add, and you think about how to attach it to the camera. And I think that the thing you have to really realize, especially as you start to really look at these rigs, is that you really have to prepare for it as you start to build for it. So as soon as you start having a camera there, and there's a lot of different things that you can be using, but like, for instance, this is from many years ago, but to give you a sense of, where things, start to go, let me pull this up here. You start attaching a lot, to these cameras and attaching in general, trying to figure out how these things are going to work. So if we look at this, like for instance, this camera here, This is, this is a very simple rig that we have set up here. But you have we basically have motors here. We have these are the controllers for those motors, and so they're getting feedback for them. And then of course we have to figure out. Now a lot of them are these little arms become very, very useful. We have lots and lots and lots of those. Here's a tally box that we had to figure out how to put on. And then, of course, you have rails that are allowing you to put those, to attach all of those things to it. So rails become a thing, and these are larger rails. These are, I think, 19 mil rails that we use, and those are standard production. Now, this is all in a dove plate down here. So I don't have a picture of the dove plate that's readily available, but that is it's very easy for us to lock in and lock out of. A couple other ones here. If you look at this, this is a kind of a jib that we had. And one of the things that it seems simple, but we find that we run out of a lot of is if you look carefully, what you'll see here are little Velcro strips. These are little eyelet Velcro strips, and they're everywhere. And as we start to rig these things, knowing how many Velcro strips you have is important. We buy whole rolls of them that you use there. Here's another version of that where you can see like all these little, and we're kind of tidying up everything, with those Velcro strips as we start to build those out. A lot of the rigging also to support the cameras. I mean, the cameras may be here, but you also have to think about, how are you going to rig, we won't talk too much about this, but how to rig, a lot of these bits and pieces up here that we've used in the past. Other things that are really interesting for rigging is how you're going to monitor things around it. So one of the things that we've used a lot of are these little microflexes. Not microflexes, micro grip. This is from Matthews. And these are tiny little things, and they're like a little erector set, but they have, we have, all kinds of little mounts for them, and these little eyelets here that allow us to kind of place the monitor exactly where we want it to, to make some of that stuff work. So those are some other things to think about there. I think I got all the. And here's the most recent rig, so this is from Seagraph. And you can see how what started as a tiny little camera had turned into a little bit of and this is very common. Like this level of complexity in one of these is Cassie's rig is a very common rig here. So here's our antenna, here's our transmitters, and they've got these little, and what happens is that as you start going down this path, you start getting, and typically you're buying them as you need them. But having this skeletal rig around it means that you can attach things, everywhere, and you end up with, lots of little clamps. I mean, like this is the other thing to think about is also what you're going to standardize on. Because I'm, for the bigger shows we do, there's a lot of rigs that we use that are pretty hefty. But for my personal rigs, I've kind of standardized around SmallRig just because everything kind of fits together. So SmallRig, so this is like this is what we're talking about with the, these are the, this is the beginning of building a rig that you're going to sit, a lot of stuff on top of it. A lot of times you can be rigging up your batteries, you can be rigging up your wireless transmitters, you're rigging up a lot of converters, that if you're converting from HDMI to SDI or SDI to fiber or, everything else. As you start building these things out, the other bits and pieces that you have, here, you start to have lots of these little clamps. These are great. SmallRig, again, if you start to really work on these, this is like just a little clamp that goes in, and it's designed to, screw into the SmallRig and then also screw into the next piece of something that's relatively small there. It's got two balls, the two ball mounts or to turn. Other things that we, grab onto are things like, this is actually a Ulanzi. I actually like this one as a grip a little bit better. That's there. And then one of the things I do when I'm rigging iPhones for either information or for shooting is I get these are metal mounts. This is Wuhotu. I don't know if they're still available, but somebody makes them in just maybe not the same name. But really, really beefy mount. I also just with the mount that we use for I have a Peak Design case on my iPhone. And so this fits right into this square here. So it just locks in and it becomes part of that camera. So that's another way to kind of very quickly with this case to kind of grab onto it. SmallRig also makes one for the iPhone that is, you can see this is very light. It's a very light little metal rig that's designed for the SmallRig systems. As you start to do this, there's a couple other things that you want to start thinking about. And you, again, arms are another piece of this. So these are, let's see if I have, so there's a lot of these arms. Let me just grab a couple of them here. I have lots of this gear. I just grabbed boxes of it. So SmallRig makes these arms. Now, these arms were originally Noga arms, and the Noga arms are still, they're better, but they're just a lot more expensive. They're like $110 instead of $20. So these are the, this is the SmallRig version of that. This is a little arm, and we use so many of these arms. So you have, this is a larger arm. This is a smaller version of the same thing. And what happens is when everything tightens up when you tighten it, and when you loosen this here, it all moves. One thing you want to hear, if you hear that going, you want to hear that some of them work on friction and some of them work with teeth. Teeth are a good thing. So teeth are important to have on these arms because otherwise they'll slowly not work anymore. So the other thing is this handle here having kind of big thumbs turns out to be useful. Like if they're little, there's some of them that are little turns, and they're much more difficult to work with. I do like this. This one also has a larger arm on it that's easier to kind of get a hold of. Now, as you get bigger with some of these, you end up with this. This is a magic arm. Manfrotto makes this, and this one has a big old handle that you open up, and you can kind of open it up here, and this is where you start putting on larger monitors or even cameras. So we will rig cameras to rigs, usually and typically a Mayfer. I don't know if I have a Mayfer. I have one over there, but it's attached to something. Anyway, these are the magic arms that you start to use for larger rigs there. And then the only thing I'll say is once you start going into that, and again, every camera that I buy starts with the ability to rig it. So if you look at this camera here, this is the little EV10, and I bought a rig for it, and immediately, you're able to add things to it. I just buy them when I buy the cameras. Like I consider that part of buying the camera. It's like a camera case. So I would highly recommend that. Having little tool systems like this. So like, for instance, the reason I'm kind of standardizing in some cases on the small rigs is because now I have a tool set that this will pretty much work with these just swing out. I have better versions of this, but I have this in the bag. Let me see if I can cover my eyes. I have this in my bag all the time as just the kind of the backup of like I need to get something in and out of it. But once you start rigging, you become very sensitive to tools and making sure that you have the tools that you need to do that. The other thing that I do is I have a lot of screws. So SmallRig also makes this thing. This is not a SmallRig ad. It just happens to be what I use a lot of. And so this is just all it is mounted. It's a big cheese plate that has lots of threading in it. And I can just throw tons of screws and mounts, and it's got a couple tools in it as well. And I keep this in with what I'm doing. And man, like just having them, it kind of like I can easily look at it. I can tell whether I have enough things. It's super useful, and I've used it a lot. And again, there's just the problem with rigging is there's lots of different ways of rigging, and you need screws. These are relatively inexpensive. These are just little stacks of lots of little screws that are necessary that you may need somewhere. And my rule is basically if I can't find the screw, I order more. like I just order a whole bunch more. Like that'll never happen again. And so you end up with giant collections of them because they're not very expensive. And there's nothing worse than having a great rig and then having having a great rig and then not being able to connect it because you're missing one screw or one Allen wrench is something that's happened to probably most of us. So just kind of think through that. Anyway, those are some things at least to start the conversation.
Absolutely. Mitchell, your thoughts?
Yeah, what was kind of cool is that watching the evolution of all this add-on stuff to your rigs, I saw it happen when HD started coming out and people started putting matte boxes on their production cameras, which mean you need a rod system to support the lenses. And then it just went on and on and on, monitors, et cetera, et cetera. I've lost track. I mean, funny thing is, you go out on a big shoot with an array system, it might have an LF Mini in there. It's about this big.
Well, and
it's where the camera body lives, you know?
I think that's where what one of the things that happened is for a long time, cameras were their own thing. Like the camera had all the features and it had everything else out there. And we really have evolved to where people just said, I just need that was partially came from the fact that they were broadcast cameras and there were film cameras and so on and so forth. And there was kind of a past thought process there. And then it really got down. I think Arri was one of the first, and Arri and Red and a couple others to build this. I'm just going to give you a box that is the sensor. I'm going to make it as small a box as possible, and how you build monitors and where you build monitors and all those things are up to you, you know, and that's how you've really gotten into these pretty complex rigs.
Yeah, and the Mini LF, for example, is a very popular camera still, even though the Super 35 is happening. But all of them have some kind of attachment because everybody has a specific use case that requires add-on things, whether it's time code or secondary audio or monitors and things like that. Going down to the other side, when you get a DSLR camera, just like Alex said, the first thing you do when you buy a camera, this happens to be a Sony ZV-E10, just like Alex was just showing, got to put a cage on it. And the reason for that is, number one, protection of the camera, because these cameras can get dropped, and I've dropped this one a couple of times, and you need to have that ridge of metal that's supporting it, as you can see along here. But it also provides mounting points for things like cold shoes, monitors, other devices. On this one, on the side, and this is a SmallRig, by the way, I've got a nice little adapter that goes from the micro HDMI up to a full-size HDMI connector. You got to do that because these things are sticking out the side of your DSLR camera and you need it. And then there's a ton of different little add-ons. For example, Kessler makes an add-on stand that's part of the quick release system that allows you to place the camera on a level surface and not have to worry about it rolling around or doing things. That's the small version. This is the Tilta version, the larger version, which gives you a little bit more support for a larger box camera that you might have. So the idea here is outfitting your camera to be more stable, have more mounting points than the manufacturer never thought of adding, whether it's a cold shoe or other things that you need to have on your camera.
What I'd say is the manufacturers have thought of it. They give you enough mounting points on the camera so that you can put other things that you can attach something to it. Like the manufacturers just haven't bothered. I mean, there's a couple Sonys, like the Sony FX6 and a couple other, and to some degree the FX30 have a couple they've added a couple of extra mounting points, but the reality is all we want is enough mounting points to put our cages on. And then the other thing that you'll see, this is just one version, one not actually great version of this, but cheese plates. So you'll hear cheese plates. They're not full of cheddar or Gouda. Although I will say that 36-month Gouda is quite good, but it won't work on your camera. It gets sticky into the little pieces. And so, but these cheese plates are plates that just let you kind of put a lot of gear on them. So a lot of times we attach those to the top of a camera, and now we've got lots of services that we can kind of add to it and do it exactly. And again, what this allows you to do when you start rigging these out is it allows you to customize exactly the way you want this show to go. And what I find is that I rig things differently every single show. Like, it's just like, oh, we want this here for this. I mean, you get to a point where 80% of it's the same, but a lot of times there's like these little nuances that let you have the monitor just where you want it and the controller just where you want it. And you're adding this one extra converter and time code and other things that are actually there.
And a nice thing to complement the folks at SmallRig, for example, here's the cage for my ZV-E10. Notice that it put room for the battery to be able to open and close it even after the cage is on there. Every tiny little connector and thing is supported by that particular cage for that camera. So, you know, people like SmallRig, and if you're going to go to the high-end Tilta design around all of these things, and it's amazing how fast they come out with these add-ons as soon as these cameras are released.
Before we go to Paul's question, I just wanted to pop to one more thing. You can never have enough holes and mounting points I can't tell you the number of times I've mounted something in one hole and realized, oh, I just need to move it one hole down because it's not fitting what I need. For example, maybe you have an external handle like this, which is really useful. I love this because it's swivelable, and if I mount that on the left side of my camera rig on the SmallRig cage, it allows me to get a high angle or a low angle, and the camera itself can be tilted to maintain its horizon. This actually has an extra hex wrench in the bottom of it that fits everything it uses, so they understand that. And things like extra batteries. Here's the SmallRig plate that I keep on the top. This is another thing where I normally keep it here, but if I use the sunshade, I have to move it 3 holes over on my rig, or it just won't fit. There's all these little kind of fiddly things that you go through as you're learning to cageify your camera. Paul, take it away.
Okay, you've seen the intermediate and advanced. Now we have the beginner. This is the ZV-1. I'm going to turn it on. You can see that it's got the SmallRig. It's got a nice wood thing here. And it has the cheese thing on the side and on this side. And then it comes with this grip. This is a pretty cool little grip. See, it goes into a tripod. And you can also do like this or like this. So it gives you a number of different options. So there you have it, the beginner level ZV-1 Sony. There you go.
Well, I think the point that we're all making is that the camera manufacturers understand that everybody has different use cases. They have different accessories. So they've created this system that allows you the maximum amount of flexibility in deciding what you need for your shoots. Maybe you have a wireless mic, maybe you don't. Maybe you're connecting directly into the XLR adapter on the side of a Blackmagic 6K, so you don't want to have to deal with the 3.5 millimeter audio at all because you've adapted to XLR and you're going to be running balanced audio through the system. But somebody else may need to come in via some wireless receiver that has a 3.5 millimeter. So this is all about choice and flexibility and being able to build the rig that you need to get your work done. I think that takes us to our questions. So Mitch, what have we got first?
Jumping into questions, Samuel Nordvik in Norway asks, what types of quick release systems do you use for cameras, and have you considered to switch to something else?
Mitchell, start us off.
I like the Arca quick release. It's a standard that's across a lot of different systems. But here's one of the gotchas, is not all manufacturers do exactly to spec. For example, a SmallRig Arca may not quite fit a Condor Blue Arca. I have a bunch of Kessler ones, and those are the ones I've found to be the most consistent and most tight for the specification of Arca quick release. So that's what I like to use. I use it on my Sockler behind me. I use it on my FX3 in front of me. And for my little walk-around Sony ZV-E10, which also has that Kessler thing on the bottom.
Paul Wallace. Oops,
Well,
not hearing it,
I'm
Paul.
going out on a limb here to see if it's been so long since I've used the quick release. Let's see how quick it is. You have to turn this knob right here. So it's not very quick. That's what it takes to disconnect.
That's a kind of a standard tripod quarter 20 in the bottom of that, which is most of these things, most of the holes you see on these plates are standard quarter 20s. They've been around the industry forever. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, on the higher end, dove plates are really nice. So dove plates are a large groove. I'm trying to grab one here so I can. I don't have a picture of mine that I've used for other things, but they're fast and also very adjustable. So here's a picture of a dove plate. The Arca Swiss is what we use probably for a lot of the smaller stuff. But when you start getting into larger cameras, you end up starting to do something more like this. So this dove plate allows you to basically, you have, obviously you have some mounts here, but once this is hooked to the camera, you lock it here, but you can move it back and forth a lot. You have a lot of travel. And the reason that that's important is because a lot of times you need to balance a camera. And these rigs, this dove plate is not something you put your EV10 on. It's something you put a larger camera on. So, but what it allows you to do is you have a lot, and you can get some of these plates can be very long, like the very long dove plates. And what you can do is you can move this back and forth. And the reason for that is as you start to build your rig, one of the things that's important is that if you think about your camera, you have your camera here and you're on your tripod. When you let go of when you turn all the friction down on, this is how I balance a camera, is I turn all the friction off on my tilt, and then I set my camera sit right there without any friction at all. It wants to sit flat because that means after you've done your rig, that whole camera has to sit and not want to pull forward or back. And the reason for that is, number one, it's much easier to operate. So the camera's a lot easier to operate when it's balanced. It doesn't want to pull down if you let go, and it means that it's kind of a really light touch for the operator to just move things up and down and around. And so you're balancing that camera. And in addition to that, it's much easier on the head. So especially if you're near the edge of what the head can do or higher than what the head can do, it has to be balanced, because otherwise a fluid head will literally start leaking fluid, because it's getting pulled down over long periods of time. So you're reducing the longevity of your head by not having it balanced. You can also turn that friction up, and now you're reducing the longevity of the brakes. So there's a lot of things that you can do there. So having a balanced camera is really important. So having these longer dove plates allow you to really slide that camera forward and back, especially when you're dealing with larger lenses, and really get that thing to be balanced correctly, so that you can operate it better, but also so that all the equipment works for a longer period of time.
And one of the trends I've seen is we're shooting on smaller cameras, particularly iPhones and things like that, a lot. So they're making a lot of these things that used to be relatively large, smaller and smaller. Here's the top of my monopod, and I have a little 2-rig set of micro little locks. These actually come from SmallRig. It's Hawk lock system. And so you have your basic rig, snap your camera into that, and then you have 2 little things. I can put a light on one side and an iPhone cage, like the SmallRig cage, on the other. And so I actually have both the camera and a light source rigged really small. And these are really robustly engineered. They have a really positive spring lock on them. They hold really tightly. The receivers underneath the various things, whether it's a light or a camera bottom, are very small, but it's still very stable. So I'm really enjoying, for the really quick run and gun iPhone stuff that I do, that Hawk lock system that I hadn't run into before. Let's move to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, would the SmallRig line of products be what you use for a remote kit?
Well, it's one of the predominant names. They're doing a ton. I'm not saying it's the only thing. This is a very, very, very active space. There are more people shooting content than ever before. They're using phones. They're using larger cameras. So there's a lot of manufacturers who are trying to get into this space. But certainly, SmallRig is a very high quality, very highly engineered, and they come up with new products all the time, particularly as new devices come out that maybe need a different approach, like those very, very small locks as opposed to the older style Manfrottos. Alex, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who make these. Wooden Camera makes probably some of the higher end ones. So you have Wooden Camera, you have Blue Condor, which is, and if I was going to say, if I was going to rank these based on my experience in quality, now I use SmallRig because I think the cost benefit is good, but I would say that Tilta is, let's go with something else. Tilta is probably the most affordable. Tilta, if I can spell, is probably the most affordable, then SmallRig, then Blue Condor, or Condor Blue.
Condor Blue.
Condor Blue. And then Wooden Camera is kind of the next. And then there's some other, esoteric ones after that. But of all the major ones, I would say that this is, affordability goes this way and quality goes that way. And you're making decisions about, what makes sense for you financially. I find that the Tilta stuff is where I started, and it's pretty good. But I did find that I had a wider range of options, and I thought the build quality was just a little bit better with the SmallRig. The Condor Blue stuff I look at, and the build quality is really good, but it's a little bit more expensive. And so I've made choices over what I should use for the smaller rigs that I have. And then, of course, some of the bigger rigs that we've used, we're using Wooden Camera, and again, some esoteric brands that build some really complicated rigs.
Mitch?
I find that the Kessler are the best machined and built. because they consistently have better tolerances and stay closer to like the Arca Swiss specs. It's worked for me. I have Tilta on my FX3. I like the Tilta ecosystem. Condor Blue, lots of great stuff. And the SmallRig is sort of the low end for me because they're not quite well manufactured, but they're very convenient and very reasonably priced. And don't try to mix your...
don't mix and match.
Don't mix and match.
The system, that's the biggest thing is that the system, I consciously picked SmallRig for what I was doing, for what I needed. And now I don't really consider a lot of other options because, like, for instance, the rails, the 15 millimeter rails on the SmallRig don't quite fit most of the other ones. And so there, there's a bunch of things that these don't, all the tolerances are, again, they're for their own stuff. They're not paying attention to anybody else's stuff. And so they're not a very good mix and match system. So you do have to kind of make a decision. I've used Kessler cranes, which are really great. I just haven't used a lot of the Kessler. I didn't even know that they made the rigging until Mitch told me a couple of weeks ago. So I didn't even know that they did that. So it's good.
Another thing I think we haven't talked about yet is longevity, which is how long are you going to be keeping this rig together as a unit? I've noticed that I tend to swap my phone out every 2 years. And so I'm asking myself, who's most likely to come out quickest with a cage for that fits in my system? And my answer right now is SmallRig tends to be really fast as soon as a new iPhone or as soon as a new camera configuration comes out. They're probably going to be one of the first to market. And that becomes important as you're trying to say, do I change? I'm changing a lot more than just my phone when I change my phone. I'm going to be changing this entire ecosystem around it of the cage and maybe lens adapters and a bunch of other stuff.
The camera one is the iPhone one is the hardest one because with SmallRig, because I do change it typically because I'm on a show about Apple. I tend to change it every year, so I have a lot of these laying around from older versions of it. But this is Tom Ferguson got us hooked on these. This is the SmallRig version of this that has a lot of your external mounts that we would have normally, but it fits on your phone. It gives you that. So there's rigging for your phone, and you can also get for that you can get little handles. So these are all stuff that you can rig onto that as well. So, yeah.
Yep. All sorts of possibilities here. Paul Wallace, continue.
Yeah. Another little bonus from SmallRig. They gave you this little toolkit that there's actually a case within a case. So I've got to take it out, and there it is. You've got
I think that's
all the tools you need for your SmallRig.
I think that's the same one that I showed a little earlier. I just don't put it back in its case. I just carry it around like a pocket. Like the one thing I will say about this is that I have another set of most of these on my own with longer handles and everything else, because this is a pretty inconvenient tool for many of the rigging that you need to do. So it's convenient that you can put it in your case as a backup. But if you're using this all the time, you're not using it well, because there's much better tools that have longer access points and other things that you can get into that will be much easier to use and do quickly. So if you're working quickly, you're going to get real Allen wrenches and real, like things that will allow you to build these up, especially if you're in a shop. But even if you're not, this is my SOS. Like, this is like, I need something right now. Another thing that I've used a lot of, because it's really inconvenient to use this all the time. It's really slow. And so when you get into production, time is money. So you want to have the right tools for that. The other thing that I don't have with me right now, but I've used a lot when I'm on set, when I'm building rigs, is I have a tread. Leatherman makes a tread. It looks like a bracelet, and it's got most of them built into the bracelet, and it is TSA approved. I've used it. I've flown with it. And you can pull it off. And again, not what you want to use all the time, but having something on your wrist that you can make most of the adjustments is useful.
And to Alex's point about being able to work fast, I have a small hand ratchet that has a set of bits that do all these. And boy, it's so much nicer to be able to just go rat, and it's tightened, rather than trying to figure those L
and a lot of them I have, we use power drills and power screwdrivers a lot for these. We just turn their break point down really low, so that they'll start as they get to something. So you're not making them do any work that in a way that would damage something. They'll stop almost immediately. But they do, like if you're starting to put these together really quickly, having these, and you can get precision ones. I have a precision powered screwdriver that really is all the little little bits and pieces, and that really speeds things up when you're kind of moving through things.
Mitchell, you wanted to come back and make another comment?
Tilt on their quarter 20 screws, they put these little come on, Mitch. Put these little magnetic things if you don't happen to have a quarter, so you can tighten them up. That's handy. Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting about SmallRig is that a lot of their user base does the actual designing of these cages and add-ons. They accept specifications from user base people, and they manufacture to suit.
Let's move to the next question.
Next question in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. How do you account for car mounting or any shaking while moving that may jar loose components?
Car mounting, mobile rigs, a big industry behind that for Hollywood, of course, and there's all sorts of bars and suction cups, and it's a whole different thing. Let's have Alex dive into some of this.
Yeah, the best place to look for it is car mounting suction cups at filmtools.com. So go to filmtools.com. They sell all of them in one place. There's like a whole page that you'll see there. So there's a couple things you want to think about when you think about car mounts. Is number one is the ones that if you're putting on something that matters, you're going to need to get a car mount with a pump. So these are suction cups that have a little button on the side. And what you're going to do is you're going to push that button in, and it's going to suck all the air out of it. You got to be careful on an older car because it will take the paint off of it if you're not careful. If on newer cars it's fine, but on older cars you have to be kind of careful of this. But the main thing is if you have a smooth surface, or a glass surface, that thing will just become part of it. And it is. I haven't tested it, but I think it would, in some cases, dent the car before it came off the surface. And so these are you can get them in lots of different diameters, and obviously the larger diameter, the more it's going to grab onto. But it also makes it harder because you need a longer surface for it to sit on. So we have smaller ones and larger ones that we use. And then the other thing you want to look at is what kind of mount is it. Typically, it's a quarter 20 or a 3/8. Typically, I like to try to get 3/8 on those. The smaller ones will be quarter 20, but the 3/8/16 is the one that I generally prefer to mount those. And that's gonna those are really really solid mounts. A lot of times you're going to use multiple mounts, and so if you have a camera, let's say you have a side of a door, a lot of times you're not going to put a camera, hanging off with one mount. You're going to put a bunch of mounts, and then you're going to rig that camera to all of them. And that's going to give it a lot more. If you look at a lot of camera mounts on cars, you'll see 2, 3, 4 mounts that are going on the car. And that's because the problem is a lot of these tend to be, if you think about it here, if you think about it looking from the side, a lot of these don't hold as well when they go one direction or another. So if they're sliding, they'll tend to want to slide a little bit more than they will want to come straight off. And so you want to create something that's going to be able to move back and forth with that. So those are the things you want to think about when you think about rigging to a car. Generally, we use a lot of suction cups because they also do the least amount of damage. If you start, gripping onto things. I mean, another thing you want to think about with rigging is also just what are you going to grip onto and how are you going to do it and how you're going to do it without damaging the item. And so, we use a lot of things like cardellini's, but those are then padded and a lot of other things to kind of keep it, from damaging the work that we're doing. Oftentimes that can be an expensive part of production. And I've written a lot of checks for things that we thought were going to work. So it's, and a minor little chip can be, in my case, the last one was $1,400. It was a little piece of paint this big. So just keep that in mind.
Paul Wallace?
Yeah, I tried a lot of these, and most of them went right back to Amazon until I found the Lipaya car phone mount video recording universal magic arm suction car phone holder mount, which goes on your glass. And it's Lima Echo Echo Papa India Yankee Alpha Lipaya. Look it up on Amazon.
And yeah, it's interesting. And I'm never comfortable with just a suction cup rig. And so I'm always if I do that, and I've had to do it on cars and other things, I want also as much of a cage as I can build around it. And if you look up Hollywood process car and process trailers, 2 ways that they do it in Hollywood. A process trailer, they actually put the car on a flatbed. And so the car isn't actually under its own power and wheels. But on a process car that's built around with rails, they have a lot of mounting points. Even if you can't do that, a long cable, aircraft type cable hooked to the mirror, side mirror or something where if your suction fails, the camera is not going to get totally destroyed unless you're working with a sacrificial camera and you're planning for that. But you never know when they're going to hit just the right bump and that suction is going to be lost. So to me, that is a primary, but it also has to have secondary and maybe tertiary mounting to keep the devices from getting messed up. Paul, do you have a last thought before we move on?
Yeah, the Lepi has never fallen off my windshield, but I wouldn't recommend you park it in direct sunlight.
Yeah, well, everybody has their own risk tolerance. If you're working with a GoPro mounting in the car, it's not a big deal. If you're working with a Blackmagic 6K and it's your primary money earner in your life, you're going to treat it a little bit differently because you just can't afford to make the mistake. It'll put you out of business. So anyway, next question.
Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois asks, can Alex share the link to his erector set that he shared?
Alex, you want to?
Yeah, I just dropped it in. So I dropped it into the, I'll put it in the panel view too, but I dropped it into the general chat as well. This is the Matthews micro grip. So Matthews, it's msegrip.com/product/micro grip. But if you just do Matthews micro grip, you'll see versions of that. And one of my biggest regrets when I had to close up my company and sell everything, there were just boxes and boxes and boxes. I grabbed a couple things out of it, but I didn't grab one of those boxes because I didn't realize how expensive they were. I didn't think about it because, we just bought lots of them for our kits. And there's probably a couple $1,000s of micro grips sitting in there. So they're really, really great. They have these little bases, super useful for the kind of like just putting things into just the right place. So I would highly recommend them.
Yeah, you hear some names over and over again, and Matthews is one of those names out of Hollywood. They've been around in the grip business for decades, and they really make a ton of excellent products. And they recently have been getting into this smaller and smaller stuff. I mean, it used to be once upon a time that I don't know if I have a grip head around me, a standard size grip head. Oh, here's some. Grip head to me was always this kind of thing. It was a relatively large thing. It went on the end of a C-stand. Well, suddenly you can find much smaller versions of the same thing because these rigs are getting lighter weight. So you're buying kind of a new generation of grip gear designed for lighter weight, more agile, fits into smaller areas, and you can rig more things with it. So it's just how the industry is evolving. Let's go to the next question.
Roscoe Jones from Madison, Indiana has a question. What are your thoughts on half cages that try to preserve access to some of the ergonomics designed into the camera body?
Alex, start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there definitely some cameras lend themselves towards cages and some don't. A lot of the box cameras are really built around it, and it's easy to build a rig. But you do end up like the FX30 that I have is a half rig, so it's just got a kind of an L or maybe a U that goes around it, and leave some of those over because it'd just be really hard to put a cage there. I'm sure that they made that decision. The half cages are better than nothing. Definitely. You just have a little less access, but I think that it does. We see those a lot as well. It's just I prefer full cages. When there's one available, I'll always get a full cage, but a half cage is something that I will get occasionally if that's all that's available.
Paul, Mitch Hill.
Alex, if you want, you can get a full Tilta cage for your FX30 because the FX30 shares the same body with the FX3.
I'm already committed.
Oh, he's committed to it.
I'm already committed to my system, so I'm not.
Yeah. The other thing is that it makes sense, Roscoe, to your question, because sometimes you just want the bottom to add a few extra threads to it. So you'll see them mount on the bottom and leave all the stuff on the top, and vice versa, like a top part, a bottom part. Sometimes you can buy both of them so you can add it later on and have a full cage.
Paul Wallace.
Yeah, the ZV-1, Sony ZV-1, very unergonomic. So a full cage is recommended because it adds a lot of ergonomics, and it's very easy to grip. I love this wood panel touch here.
Probably taking a little note from Wooden Camera, who has a lot of those kind of, they feel really good in your hand. Let's go to the next question.
Art Aldrich from New York, looking for someone to make a custom 19 millimeter to 15 millimeter rod support adapter with a 6.5-inch drop. Any ideas?
Alex?
Yeah, I haven't seen the 6.5-inch drop. So I think that what I'd probably end up doing, there's adapters out there. So the problem is that a lot of the bigger systems are all going to run on a 19 millimeter, and our little systems that I'm using are using a 15 millimeter. This is the, I don't know if I have a 19 millimeter really easily accessible, but I had a 15 millimeter around here somewhere. But anyway, so the a lot of times you'll have ones, they're wider apart, typically, the 19 millimeters, and then they're bigger, obviously. These are the rod sizes. So you have one that is a 19 millimeter, then you'll have one that's closer together that's a little smaller as a 15 millimeter, and that's how people will convert those. Between the two systems, what to get a drop down, to have that drop, I think that what you're going to want to do is have a 19 millimeter that just has quarter 20s or 3/8 on the across it, and then you're going to rig something that goes down and then put another. So it's really a converter that you'll build pieces of, using different pieces to grab onto those, as opposed to someone that's going to build one all in one piece.
Next question.
Next one in from Graham Codwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. When adding a video camera to a tripod, I prefer a ball to a flat plate, as it's much easier to get level, in my opinion. What does the panel think?
Alex.
Yeah, for most of the professional, almost all the professional tripods we use, we have ball heads. I don't have a picture of one right now, but a ball head basically, so when you're buying less expensive tripods, you're just going to have something that sits on the tripod. Now, my smaller tripods all don't have ball heads, and the reason for that is that what comes without the ball head is oftentimes you get a rod that goes up. So you can do fine adjustment on the camera up and down by up to a foot, that you can just kind of move it up and down. And so that last little bit of just getting the adjustment, you're not messing with the problem without that rod, you're messing with the legs to try to get a certain height. The one exception to that is a hot pod, which is now owned by Sackler. Well, O'Connor used to make it, and I think it's now a Sackler hot pod. The hot pod is a pneumatic center that goes up. It has a ball head and a pneumatic thing that'll go up about 2 feet. And the only danger of that is don't put your head over it when you open it up and there's not a camera on it, because it's got a lot of upward force. We haven't lost anybody there, but it's a couple close moments.
Put your eye out with that.
Yeah, put more than your eye out. Don't take your whole jaw off your face. And so it's really powerful, because it's designed to move. We use that one to move teleprompters with big cameras, with big lenses up and down seamlessly. And so the reason that that's important is that you really want to make adjustments for the, you have a VIP and you want to get it just right, but messing with the legs or doing anything else would be, you really, the next step is a jib or something like that. So anyway, it's a great, the hot pods, I had a couple of them for a long time, and they're really, really useful for that. But the littler ones, I use these little rods back and forth, and then you kind of give up. Most of the time, you kind of give up the ball head. The ball heads come typically in 75 millimeter, 100 millimeter, 150. I think it's 150 millimeters, the largest ones that I've used or seen. But the most common one that we see the most is the 100 millimeter ball head for most things, or what we see under, with heads less than $15,000. When you go to heads less than $1,000, you see 75 millimeters pretty often. And what that allows you to do is it has a level on it, and you have something, either it's either a grip or a handle. You loosen it, and you can kind of rock your whole camera into being level, and then you tighten it back up again. And usually that level has to be, of course, you typically have it on the tripods. The tripod's level, whether the camera is or not, is up to you. So anyway, that's the thing. Again, for most professional things that we do, the ball heads are preferable in 99% of the cases.
Mitchell?
Like the flat plate. Behind me is a Sackler Flowtech. It's a newer type of tripod that you can get. They're kind of expensive, but what they're doing now is they're placing them in a cup, and the cup is very movable.
That's the ball head.
So it's really not a ball head. It's a flat plate with the thing.
And it doesn't have any adjustment at the bottom. I guess if it has.
No, you just lift the legs up and down, and because there's no pin where you have to unscrew the head, it can go all the way down to crabbing levels. So it's kind of interesting, just different, and you got to get used to it, because I'm used to the old-fashioned kind. Mm-hmm. But the flat head has all the things that Alex was talking about. It's got lit bar levels and things like that built into it, so you can get it pretty level.
What's that
bubble
head?
levels?
What's it called?
Bubble levels.
Pardon me?
What's it called again? What's the brand?
It's a Flowtech. It's a newer version of Sackler. I think they're switching to them.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Wallace.
Okay, I'm using a ball head for my Insta360 link, and I'm going to attempt to show it to you if I can. It's over.
You need to tilt up.
Tilt up. Okay.
There you go.
Anyway,
and I think that there's a distinction here of video ball heads and still camera ball heads. So what I think Paul's showing here
There
is
it is. There it is.
Yeah,
there it is. And as you can see, it's got a notch in it. So you have to be careful where you position the notch in your ball head if you want to tip it up and down.
Yeah, related to this is typically more of we use it for video cameras, but that's typically more of a still camera thing. So a lot of still cameras have ball heads so you can really move it up and down and around, but they're not really manageable as far as a video camera because you can't really, they're not a fluid head. So there are a lot of ball heads. Usually when you see the kind of ball head that Paul's showing there, that's really designed for a still camera or something that's going to remain stationary all the time. And they make little ones of those, and they make very big ones. Those are, a lot of times we use them for monitors that attach to our cheese plates and everything else. And so those are little ball heads that are really more of a still camera ball head or a utility ball head, as opposed to what we were talking about before with these larger heads. The ball mounts are a mount to the tripod for a fluid head that we would use for video capture.
Yeah, most of these go on a 3/8 pin and they screw onto the top of a tripod flat plate, and then you have the ball head and the small ones. I use them all the time for small monitors and stuff like that. They're all useful. You can see that everything scales up and down, and the basic idea, infinite adjustability, is just as smart for a small light that you want to change its direction on top of a lighting stand as it is for a big rig with a teleprompter where you want to be able to hold something at the top, unscrew the ball head adjustment, get it flat with the bubble level, tweak it down, and then you know your camera base is parallel and perpendicular. Let's go to the next question.
And it's from Alejandro Guerrero from Madrid, Spain. Hello, this is Alejandro Guerrero. And regards from, he's saying hi from Madrid, Spain. My question about rigging is, I bought a Blackmagic Studio Pro 6K recently, which I love, but the camera has a big problem. It has no holes at all, nothing to attach a camera tracker.
Typically, in that kind of circumstance, there's a couple of ways that we've solved it in the past, one of which is to mount things to whatever its support is. A lot of the tripods that we're talking about, the bigger ones, have some sort of a 3/8 or quarter 20 or something like that on the side, and through the use of an arm or something like that, you might be able to do another arm that attaches something else. Alex, what have you run into as a way to solve this?
Yeah, I mean, cheese plates across the bottom, or now it does have two big holes. If you look at the picture that was placed here, it's got basically underneath it, it has rod mounts. So those rod mounts are that's where you're going to typically start to build everything out. So from those rods, you can attach almost anything. So when you don't have anything, this is because it's really designed as a studio camera, not a film camera, and they're not really thinking about you using it as that type of camera there. But what you want to think about there is you're going to either attach it on a plate to the camera, and so you'll end up adding mounts below it, and then you'll build up around it, or you're going to use those rods, and those rods will be the basis of what you attach things to put that tracker on.
Yeah, I'll also make one little point too. The more things you attach to the camera, the more unwieldy it becomes for any kind of handheld use or stuff like that. And in a studio camera circumstance, for me, I often outboard onto a separate stand things like my monitor so that I don't have it sitting on top of the camera, adding more weight and making me look up. I'd rather be able to glance from the camera just to the side to see my reference monitor on a stand to the side. So all of these rigging things are to allow you to work the way that you find the most comfortable and convenient when you're shooting. Next question.
Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado asked, short right-angle cords, 3D printed camera doors that incorporate cords.
Alex?
I just ordered some more sprigs. I've been using the sprigs as a way to do this. These are little things that go into your quarter 20s, and then you can run cords through them. And, they're not super cheap, but for the trouble, I'd rather just order the sprigs. And there's a lot of cable management stuff that comes with people who are building these. And I just, from a time perspective, I've decided that it's not worth me building, printing lots of little things to do that. Also, my son has become exceptional at printing things, and so now the printer runs all the time. So I have to get into the queue to print anything, which has slowed things down.
Let's go to the next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri. What special thought is needed for rigging a 180 or 360 camera?
Alex.
Very little rigging for the 360 camera because no matter where you rig, you'll see it. So that becomes a problem with 360 cameras. For 180 cameras, it's just a matter of staying behind that 180 plane. And there's definitely things that we do with the 180 cameras that allow us to, again, outboard power, a lot of things like that. Because one of the things that you'll have is, I want to shoot for a while. You're going to want to be able to put it on a larger power brick and, that type of thing to make it all work. So there are some things you have to think about for the 180 lens, but it's just a matter of staying behind the plane. But the most typical things that we add for the 180, again, the 360s, there's very little you do except for maybe attaching it to the bottom of the tripod and then running services up to it. So we've done a lot of where we have power and it sits right below the camera. Usually there's a blind spot below the camera that's about a foot in diameter, and we'll put all the, foot to 2 feet right under the camera is not viewable. And so a lot of times under there, we'll put all of our GAC, so we'll have power. Sometimes for our Ozos, we had SDI relays, we had, fiber relays, tons of stuff underneath it. And then we run it very carefully up the tripod where it's not going to be seen, or up the at least the stand that we're using. And then for the 180s, we have batteries are a big piece of it. If we're going to hook an ambisonic mic to it, if we're going to do a bunch of other things like that, those are things that we might be putting behind it. And then oftentimes we want to move, like for instance, if you're using ambisonic, one of the problems we have with cameras is they tend to have a fan, and so they tend to make a little bit of noise. And so we have to rig it so that the mic is a little bit further away, and sometimes we even put I put a little block to try to cut down some of that sound from the camera. And that's why, by the way, one of the reasons you see some cameras, some of these 180 cameras with a big rig around them, it's what we call a blimp, and it's designed to keep the camera sound completely in the camera in a box so that it doesn't affect the record.
Looks like we're heading to, I'll just make one more point about that. For me, I see a 360 or a 180 shot, and I don't know why, but my mind always goes to reflections. It drives me nuts because it's hard enough to police a standard 4x3 or 16x9 frame to look at anything that's reflecting back to crew movement, things like that. Boy, when I get into 180 degrees, and I would think it'd be even worse in 360, trying to hide crew and the rest of the people that are involved in a shoot in a 360 must be a nightmare. I don't even know where I guess you'd have to remote everything not to have people getting distracted by, in their 360 view, seeing people who are helping you run this shoot. So I always consider there's a whole bunch of extra effort that has to go in when your camera is seeing everything that's going on, unless that's part of the shoot. You want that there. Next question.
Paul Wallace asked, rigging for an iPhone.
Yeah, listen, it's a bigger and bigger topic, and we're doing more and more of it. And I think I've said on here a couple of times, I'm shooting probably 50 to 60% of the work that I'm doing for even corporate customers. I'm shooting on an iPhone now. It is a specialist thing. Thankfully, there are more and more tools available all the time. But Paul, did you want to specifically mention some things for your question?
Yeah, I have this Insta360 Flow, which could be a replacement for the Insta360 Link. I'm not going to drag it out because I've put you through enough demos today, but it's a pretty neat device, and it gives you stabilization and a built-in tripod, a built-in extender. You can use it as a selfie stick or a webcam. Pretty neat device.
Oh, excuse me, Alex.
Yeah, as far as rigging to the specifically to the question, this is the thing that I think it works the best. This is the SmallRig rig mount, and it just opens up at the end like this. You slide it in and you close it, and it also takes it has mounts for moment lenses. So if you have those little anamorphic moment lenses, or you want longer or shorter lenses, they'll just pop right on there. And you have both a cold shoe mount right here, as well as a series of 1/4-20s on almost every direction. So if you're trying to rig something to your camera, in my opinion, this is the solution. And they come for every iPhone made in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's what I use as well. The only thing I don't like about it is you have to take off any bumper cases you have on your phone, because it's machined right to the body dimensions of the phone, and to slip it in, you have to take off any extra stuff. That takes us to the close of things. Thank you so much for watching today. We appreciate you being here every day to do that. Tomorrow we're doing custom computing with Puget Systems, high-end computers for production. So that should be fascinating. Don't forget, Saturday we do 2 hours of Q&A, and Sunday is our introspection day around this kind of stuff. So thank you for being here. Big thanks. Producers, the people who asked the questions today, you did a great job as always. To the panelists who show up and offer their expertise for free every single day here at Office Hours. This show is impossible without people who are on the panel, all the people asking questions, and it certainly is impossible without our back-end crew, the people who are behind the scenes, who are spending their time making sure that all this signal flow is done perfectly. It's a small army back there. They arrive digitally from literally all over the planet every day and help make this show possible. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for participating in Office Hours. Don't forget, After Hours runs 24/7. After we finish, we will see you tomorrow. Thanks for being here.
Now I got to figure out where I put everything. I got to put it all back. Pulled all this stuff out. I had to put a little table.
I was lucky I was coming back from a shoot, so I had everything kind of just a disaster. Anyway.
I realized right before, I was like, where is all the stuff? And I realized that a whole bunch of stuff's in the garage, and I didn't have time to run over there.
You know what? One of the problems with buying all this stuff is that you end up with a box full of spare parts of different things.
You know, the best thing is I got a U-line shelf in the garage that has all the little trays, and then I have all the little things printed on the front of what they all are, and it's really useful. It's not very expensive. It's it's good.
I don't have that kind of free time.
I have a whole tray of, well, what happens is when you own a company that had 20 of those going down the wall, and you just keep